What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the latest vampire film coming from Universal Pictures, and that film is called Abigail. Directed by the duo of Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, better known as Radio Silence, this film is written by Stephen Shields and Guy Busick and stars an all-star cast of people like Melissa Barrera, Dan Stevens, Catherine Newton, Angus Cloud, Giancarlo Esposito, and many more. So when I first saw the trailer for this movie, I was instantly intrigued. If you've been following this channel for any amount of time, I've said it so many times, but I love me a good horror comedy that believes in itself. And in the case of Abigail, the trailers just really sold me on something that was right up my alley, something that's ridiculous to say the least. But it also seemed like something that was also going to honor the legacy of various horror and vampire franchises coming specifically from Universal Pictures. And then when I saw that the visionaries and directors behind the camera were Radio Silence, who of course have done things like the two latest Scream films, as well as Ready or Not, and I think Abigail actually takes a lot of inspiration from Ready or Not, I was pretty excited. You got a solid team behind the camera, you got a solid cast in front of the camera, and you have a ridiculous premise. And let's get into that premise without getting too far into spoilers, even though the trailers, in my opinion, are the biggest thing I have a gripe with, as they gave away way too much of this movie. The movie opens up and we're introduced to a bunch of criminals who are about to work together to capture a young girl, a 12-year-old girl, whose father is very wealthy, and they're very excited about the idea of holding this young girl hostage for the ransom. These individuals all feature people like Melissa Barrera, Dan Stevens, William Catlett, Catherine Newton, Angus Cloud, Kevin Durand, and the one who's got them all together for this, played by Giancarlo Esposito. Not long into having this girl in captivity, though, they learn that there is something very unique about her, and that is that she is a vampire. So now all these criminals must work together, as they are now trapped inside of a house with a young ballerina vampire who is on the loose and trying to kill them. They were trying to keep her captive, and now they are the ones who are captive. And that is the basic gist of this film without getting too far into spoilers. As I mentioned, I do think the trailers gave away way too much of this movie. There are a lot of key moments of humor, visuals, and just story beats that are introduced and shown in the trailer. And while I don't necessarily mind that they show that the young girl is a vampire, I do think it would have made for a bigger twist if the trailer was in some way, shape, or form able to be edited in a way where we knew something was weird about the young girl, but not necessarily what was weird. But I understand the idea of wanting to market this film as a ballerina vampire movie, and I just love the premise. It's ridiculous, it's silly, I'm a huge fan of vampire films, and right out of the gate, as this movie opened up, I realized that this was also going to be something that honored the legacy of various vampire films that have come from Universal Pictures in particular. Radio Silence are a fantastic set of directors because I think they do such great work when it comes to horror, where you're able to enjoy the film. It's entertaining, it can be light and fun, while also being very creepy and tension-filled at a lot of other moments. While I don't necessarily think Abigail is a scary movie, I think there's tons about this film that leans into some great horror elements that are really thoroughly enjoyed. And one of my favorite things about this film right out of the gate is the filmmaking behind it. Horror still to this day for me is one of the best genres that we got coming out with movies. While it is a little bit oversaturated at times and there's a lot of just generic films that come out in the genre, when things are great, I tend to find they're extra great. And in the case of Abigail, I love the use of practical effects, practical locations, costumes, blood, guts, and gore, bodies, dismembered bodies. Whatever the case may be, this film is utilizing tons and tons of great practical effects, and I love that. On top of that, you have great performances from our very strong cast here throughout the course of it. You have a great musical score composed by Brian Tyler, who has done musical composition for tons of fantastic films. And on top of that, the film also utilizes some great camera work and some just great overall sound design. And while it does use some CGI, it's never over the top, nor does it feel like something that completely takes away from the visual style of the film. And as I've already mentioned, the movie has a fantastic cast, and a couple of those names that you just have to mention when talking about this film are people like Melissa Barrera, who is our lead star in the film. She plays the character of Joey. You also have Dan Stevens in the mix playing the character of Frank, who I think gives a really over-the-top and fun performance. Alicia Weir, who plays Abigail, definitely is the standout in terms of just like so many moments of this film. She's so good. She's leaning into the ridiculous nature of the character, the ridiculous nature of the movie. She's leaning so into being this cutesy ballerina girl at times that you kind of are wondering, should you care for her? And at other moments being a flat out crazy monster who makes you fear for what's going to happen to our characters. And while I don't necessarily think Abigail is a completely rich narrative with deep character arcs and different things like that, the movie does enough to allow us to get to know who these characters are behind the scenes. And it does a really good job of also giving us a reason for why we don't learn too much about them, as these are all a bunch of criminals who don't know each other until this job, and to avoid from any sort of collateral damage in their real lives choose to use fake names throughout the course of the film. And so while we do learn things about the characters, it's never like a whole full-on character bio that we get to learn about them, which kept them mysterious but allowed us to learn enough about them to keep the story interesting. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Angus Cloud in here, who quite frankly wasn't my favorite role in the film, but this is, I believe, one of his last films coming out, if not his last film. Unfortunately, he did pass away somewhat recently in the recent years, so it is a shame. I never watched Euphoria, where he's really popular from, but from what I've heard from people, he's fantastic on that show, and I know that a lot of people were really, really sad to see his passing. And so seeing him here, I thought he was solid in the movie, made me laugh plenty of times, and I just figured I should at least mention his name. But the rest of the cast is fantastic. Giancarlo Esposito has some great moments to shine, though his role in the film is fairly small, and I think Kevin Durand maybe is one of the funniest characters in the entirety of the movie. And I saw Catherine Newton earlier this year in Lisa Frankenstein, which didn't blow my socks off personally. I did find her to be good in the movie, but I wasn't crazy about the movie. But I found myself enjoying her a lot more in this movie throughout the course of the runtime, as she also lends a lot to the comedic edge of this film, and you can tell she's just having a blast being in all these offbeat, over-the-top horror films. As I mentioned before, in terms of my main gripe for the film, I really just do think a lot of it comes down to the marketing. I think it just showed way too much of the film, which did remove a lot of the surprise that this film does have. I think the people who are going to benefit from this movie the most are the ones who get to see this movie 10, 15 years down the line, even 5 years down the line, and don't necessarily have the trailers in front of them all the time, like somebody like myself who goes to the theater every week and has seen this trailer dozens of times at this point. But outside of the marketing, I would say my other biggest gripes to this film is the fact that the story is pretty bare bones. I don't necessarily know that that's necessarily a negative against the film heavily, but I think it's important to recognize that this is a film that is pretty straightforward when it comes to its narrative. It really is just about a bunch of criminals who are now trapped with the person that they meant to be captive, now turning out to be a vampire, and they gotta kind of reverse roles there. Now they're the ones who are captive and running away from this vampire ballerina. The movie's silly, it's over the top, but that's probably one of my favorite things about the film as well, is that while I do recognize that the film doesn't necessarily have the deepest characters and the deepest narrative, it is just going for what it is. It's having fun with the very silly premise, and as a big fan of horror comedies that believe in themselves, I think that this film for the most part believes in itself, and I think that you see a great vision from Radio Silence behind the camera, as well as the cast. A movie like this doesn't really work if the cast doesn't know what kind of movie they're in, and they don't know what kind of performances to give in a movie like this. And you can tell that there was a unified vision both behind and in front of the camera to give this film a very realistic, while also silly feel and vibe, and give it a tone that is very specific to the film that we're seeing here. With all that said, I don't think Abigail is a film that's going to work for everybody. I think there's a lot about this movie that's going to be way too silly or ridiculous for some. But if you've seen the trailers for the movie and you know it's not up your alley, then I just wouldn't recommend it. But if this sounds like something that's up your alley, or you saw the trailers for it and it seems like something that's up your alley, I think it's definitely worth a watch. Whether you're going to enjoy it or not is going to depend on your personal taste, of course, like with any movie. But in the case of Abigail, for me, when it comes down to the filmmaking, I thought it was great. I thought the cast was fun and they knew what kind of movie they were in. The movie is fun to watch. It's super bloody and gory. There's so many fantastic moments of super bloody moments, and there's a lot of crowd-pleasing moments in the film as well. The theater I saw it in had people that were gushing with laughter in moments that even I didn't think were that funny, but people were just absolutely having a great time. There was multiple times where people were applauding for the characters or for moments with the vampire, and I really just enjoyed seeing the audience react to it, though there was one lady in my theater that was a little bit obnoxious with her commentary from time to time. But outside of that, I think this is a fun time. I really genuinely enjoyed Abigail, and I hope that you guys enjoy it too, and I look forward to hearing the various thoughts on this one. So what do you guys think about Abigail? Is it a good time? Is it a bad time? Do you think it's a fun idea or a stupid idea? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and we'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.